Okay, so in this lesson I want to talk about what is perhaps one of my most favorite features inside Photoshop, and that is the brushes, or more specifically the brush engine inside Photoshop. And we'll get to that in just a moment, but I first want to talk about how you go about selecting brushes and making simple modifications to them. So we're going to jump over here to the toolbar, and you see right here is the brush tool, so I'm just going to go ahead and select that, and you can see a number of options have shown up in the options bar here. Now the first one I want to point out is right here, this very first icon. If I click on that, it reveals my brush presets. And these are preset brushes that are built inside Photoshop. And if you don't see them when you click on this menu, you simply go into the flyout menu here, and you can go down here and choose from a number of categories of brushes. You just simply select it, click OK, and the list will show up. And to be able to use the brush, you simply just click on it. And the interesting thing about tool presets is that not only does it have a custom or a preset brush tip, but it also has a number of properties applied to it via the brush engine, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But if I go in here to my document and just start painting, you can see it's giving me a very interesting chalk effect. And the behavior of this is set up in that brush engine. Now, different from that is this menu right here, the second icon. If I click on that, you notice we've got access to a number of different types of brush tip shapes. And these are just the tip shapes. They don't have any properties applied to them or any behavioral properties applied to them using the brush engine. They're just brush tip shapes that you can actually modify yourself. So if you go in here to the flyout menu, you notice we've got a number of different categories that we didn't have in the preset area. These are just different categories of brush tips that you can select from. And again, the same way, you select the category, you can replace the list, or simply append it to your existing list. And you scroll down, and there's those brushes right there. When you select a brush, you simply click on it. You can go in here and modify the diameter and the hardness right here using these sliders. And the next items you have here, you've got the blend mode, which you can change the various blend modes. If you remember me talking about blend modes in the layers lesson earlier, then you could change the blend mode of your layers on how they blend with each other. You can also do the same here with your brushes and choose a specific blend mode and paint with that as you go. You can also modify the opacity of the brush, and you can also modify the flow and the airbrush setting. And this pretty much works just like an airbrush would. With it checked off, if I go into my document and just click once and hold, you'll see that it just gives me one spray of the pixels. However, if I go ahead and activate the airbrush and I go in here and click and hold again, you'll see it continuously is spraying pixels, very much similar to the way an airbrush would work. And the flow feature is very much similar to the way a flow nozzle works on an airbrush. You would simply just modify that on how much paint you want to be flowing. So you can drop it down a percentage, and it will make the paint flow a little bit less. So if you're used to working with an airbrush, this is a little bit closer to home in a digital fashion, but that's how those properties work. Now, let's talk about the brush engine itself. Now, you access it by going into this little icon right here and clicking on it, or you can go into the window menu and come down here and select brushes. And here's where you get a number of different types of properties that you can select from. Now, you can also access some of the various properties I've already showed you. These brush presets are the same presets you saw off in here. It just gives you the ability to select them all right in here in this one window. So you select a brush, and you notice that a number of these properties are checked on that make this brush behave the way it does. You can see down here in the preview window, it gives you a quick idea of exactly how that brush is going to behave. The brush tip shape is that same window, the second menu right here, and you can quickly access specific brushes here on how you want the brush to behave as well. So you see when I select these specific brushes, it's just giving me a straight up preview of how that brush is going to work. So if I were to paint, it just gives me a straight flow of that brush in there. So what if I wanted to change these properties? Well, you have a number of simple properties down here that you can change. You can change the diameter, you can flip the brush on its X or Y axis, you can modify the angle by inputting a specific number or using the scrubby slider. You can see if I change the angle, it reflects in the preview. And this is a very permanent change when you do this. So if you change the angle of your brush, it will always stay that way as you paint. And the roundness, of course, determines the flatness or the overall roundness of your brush. And you can also modify these interactively by going in here and clicking and dragging that arrow to change the angle. You can click these little control points and modify the roundness as well. Down here you can modify the spacing and hardness of your brush. So if we've got a very soft edge brush, as you can see right here, we can modify the hardness here and the spacing here as well. Now you can do these also interactively inside your document, and this is something brand new to Photoshop CS4. If I just move my brush panel out of the way and go inside my document, on the Mac, if you hold down the Control key and the Option key and drag your mouse left or right, you can see that we can interactively modify the size of our brush. Just like that. Now, if you're on a PC, you would hold down the Control key and then right-click and drag left or right to do the very same thing. Now, to modify the hardness or softness of your brush, you would hold down those same keys, the Control, Option, and then you would also add the Command key to that, and then drag left or right, and you can see it modifies the hardness and softness of my brush. Very, very cool. Now, another way of modifying the hardness and softness and the size of your brush on your keyboard is using your left and right bracket keys. So you notice if I use my left bracket key, my brush gets smaller as I keep pressing it. If I use the right bracket key, it gets considerably larger. And to adjust the hardness or softness of that, you simply add the Shift key to that very same action. So notice what happens in the preview window here. When I do this, if I hold down the Shift key and use the left bracket key, it gets softer. Right key gets a lot harder. So 2 ways to interactively modify your brushes right there inside the program, or right there inside your document window. Now, these other features you have, let's go ahead into the brush tip shape, and I'm going to select this leaf right here, because this will best demonstrate the very cool nature of these various brush features. Now, anytime you see the word jitter inside the brush engine, that basically means it's going to be a fluctuation of that brush as you paint. So if I have the size jitter set, that means the brush is going to change its size pretty much sporadically as you paint. That is determined on how the percentage is. Now you'll notice if I bring it down to 0, it doesn't really do that much. But by increasing the percentage, it's going to get the jitter the size even more. And of course 100% jitters it all together. Now anytime you see a control setting that you see right here, this is where you would set up your pen pressure. If you are in fact using a pressure sensitive tablet, or you can set up a fade or turn this feature off altogether. So if I turn it off, you'll notice the brush doesn't taper off on the ends, indicating that it's going to just work normally. However, if I go ahead and set it to pen pressure, you can see it tapers off, indicating that it's going to respond to how hard or how soft I press on the tablet. Other settings you can modify, the angle jitter, as you see. If I take this all the way up to 100, the brush just changes the angle, and it will do that sporadically as I brush around. Also the roundness jitter. Now if you remember I mentioned on the brush tip shapes, this angle and roundness here are very permanent changes if you modify them here. However, inside here, this is where it does it as you paint. It's a very cool effect. We'll also have the scattering feature, which allows you to basically just, as you see in the preview window, it tells you right away. It's scattering that brush in all over the place. You can modify the count of it. So let's do that. And if you see I just paint in here, it gives me a very interesting scattering effect. So, and I just want to say, these are a number of different features, and I could spend a great deal of time talking about these, but it's really a matter of experimentation. Just go in here and try different settings and see what kind of cool things you can come up with. You can also apply textures to your brush in your preset textures area right here. You can modify them by adding a texture to them. You can paint with dual brushes, meaning you select a brush tip shape here, and you can select one here and modify its properties. As you can see in the preview, various things are happening there. Makes the brush act a little bit differently. So it's basically overlapping 2 brushes at the same time. You can modify the color dynamics, meaning let's say if I had these leaves and I wanted to paint varying colors of fall leaves. So let's go here and select this color here and put that in the foreground. And let's put a darker brown or darker red into the background. And let's tell it to jitter the foreground and background colors. And as I paint, you can see it's basically toggling between those colors interactively as I paint, which is a very, very cool feature. So that's being able to modify the color dynamics. And you've got other dynamics here. You can jitter the opacity and the flow. Those settings that we saw up here in the options bar, you can modify those just by increasing or decreasing the percentages there. And you can also control it with your pen pressure as well. These other features down here don't have any settings to modify. These are just features that you can check on or off. You can add noise, wet edges to your brushes. Here's another place you can activate or deactivate the airbrush feature. You've got this smoothing feature right here, which if you don't necessarily have a very steady hand and you want to get very, very intricate strokes with your brushes, and if you're using a mouse perhaps, or if you're not very steady with the tablet pen, you can turn this on and it will assist you in helping you get much more smoother strokes in there. And you've got the Protect Texture feature. If you're using a texture, it will protect that as you paint over it. giving you that ability there. So, again, I've only touched ever so briefly on these features. Again, I encourage you to experiment with them, try different brushes, try different colors and various, just go crazy with the settings and see what kind of cool things you come up with. And you'll remember them. As you start working in Photoshop, you'll start to remember how these features work and all these kind of cool features. And as I mentioned, I've been using it for years. I'm still discovering all kinds of cool stuff every time I go in here and play around with it.